There were nights when the darkness felt absolute, a suffocating blanket woven from the threads of remembered pain. Nights when the cries of the past echoed with a ferocity that drowned out the soft whisper of divine presence. You know these nights. They descend not with a warning, but with an insidious creep, stealing the light and leaving behind a hollow ache, a profound weariness that settles deep within the bone. This is the landscape where trauma holds dominion, where the weight of what has been endured feels like an insurmountable mountain, pressing down on the very spirit, making the fragile tendrils of faith seem impossibly thin. The world often tells us that faith should be a shield, an impenetrable fortress against suffering. It suggests that true belief equates to an absence of struggle, a perpetual state of unclouded joy. But what happens when the storm within rages with such intensity that the fortress walls tremble, and the shield feels like a brittle shard? What happens when the memories, the visceral reactions, the sheer emotional exhaustion of enduring unimaginable things, loom larger than any theological certainty? This is the crucible where many find themselves, grappling with a truth that feels contrary to everything they've been taught, that sometimes, the trauma feels undeniably heavier than the faith they cling to, or perhaps, desperately try to reclaim. This is not a place of weakness, nor is it a sign of failing. It is, in fact, a testament to the profound resilience of the human spirit, and to the deep, often hidden, reserves of strength that are called forth in the face of overwhelming adversity. Yet, in those moments, surrounded by the debris of shattered peace, it is easy to believe the insidious lie that accompanies such deep wounds, the lie that perhaps, if faith were truly strong enough, such suffering would simply not be. This is the whisper of despair, the echo of the trauma itself, attempting to convince you that your current state is a direct indictment of your spiritual standing. It is a cunning deception, designed to isolate and to convince you that you are alone in this battle, that your capacity for hope has been irrevocably diminished. Charles Spurgeon, a man who knew the dark valleys of despair intimately, understood this battle. He preached from pulpits and wrote from the depths of his own experience, acknowledging the raw, unvarnished reality of human suffering when confronted with the overwhelming power of trauma. He did not offer platitudes or easy answers. Instead, he offered a truth forged in the fires of his own soul, that faith is not defined by the absence of pain, but by the courageous, often trembling, act of holding on to the divine, even when the weight of the world feels crushing. His words, echoing across time, speak directly to the soul that feels battered, bruised, and utterly overwhelmed. They acknowledge the immense difficulty, the very real feeling that faith is insufficient, and then, with profound compassion, they offer a different perspective, a different path forward. This journey we embark upon together is not about eradicating the memory of pain, nor is it about pretending that the wounds do not exist. It is about understanding how the divine, in its infinite tenderness, meets us in our deepest suffering. It is about recognizing that the very act of continuing to breathe, to seek, to even whisper a plea for help, is itself an act of profound faith. We will explore how the sacred texts, particularly the compassionate heart of the gospel, speak not to the perfect or the unblemished, but to the broken, the bruised, the weary, and the fearful. We will uncover the quiet, persistent ways in which divine love sustains us, not by removing the burden, but by walking alongside us, sharing the load, and reminding us that even in our weakest moments, we are held. The lie of abandonment, a venomous whisper born from trauma's shadow, seeks to sever our connection to the divine. It suggests that suffering of this magnitude is an indication of God's absence, a silent judgment on our diminished faith. However, this is a profoundly deceptive narrative. Consider the story of a pilot navigating a storm. Their proficiency isn't measured by the absence of turbulence, but by their skill in maintaining control, in trusting the instruments and their training even when visibility is zero. Similarly, God does not gauge the authenticity of our faith by the presence or absence of emotional comfort. Instead, true faith is revealed in the tenacious, often trembling, act of clinging to Christ, even when tears blur our vision and the storm of past experiences threatens to overwhelm us. This persistent, albeit weak, reliance is precisely what the divine heart honors. The profound sense of being left adrift, the gnawing feeling of isolation, is not the voice of the divine. It is the lingering echo of past wounds, a psychological scar attempting to redefine reality. To counter this insidious whisper, we must actively engage with the truth that God's perception of our faith is fundamentally different from our own felt experience. While we might perceive our faith as minuscule, like a flickering candle flame in a gale, God sees the deep, intrinsic value of that persistent spark. Christ does not demand an unwavering, unshakable belief that is immune to the tremors of trauma. Rather, he cherishes the fragile faith that, despite its weakness, still reaches out, still seeks him through the deluge of tears and the confusion of inner turmoil. This is the essence of the gospel's response to our pain. It is not a call for perfection, but an invitation to authenticity. It recognizes that even the faintest glimmers of trust, the most rudimentary affirmations of hope in the face of overwhelming evidence to the contrary, are testament to a spirit that, though wounded, is still alive and seeking healing. Furthermore, grasping this crucial distinction empowers us to reinterpret our struggles. Instead of viewing our current season of hardship as a sign of spiritual deficiency, we can begin to understand it as a period of profound spiritual growth, albeit one marked by intense difficulty. This reframe is not about minimizing the reality of trauma, but about shifting our focus from the perceived inadequacy of our faith to the unwavering sufficiency of God's grace. The narrative of abandonment is designed to isolate, to convince us that we must bear these burdens alone. Yet, the divine promise is one of steadfast companionship, a presence that is most keenly felt not in the absence of struggle, but in its very midst. It is in these moments of profound vulnerability that the true nature of divine love is revealed, a love that embraces the bruised reed, not to break it further, but to gently support and ultimately restore it. Consider how this understanding impacts your daily approach to spiritual disciplines. When the weight of trauma makes prayer feel like an insurmountable task, the focus shifts from eloquently articulating complex theological concepts to simply uttering a raw, honest plea, "Lord, hold me." This is not a diminished form of prayer, it is a pure, unadulterated expression of reliance. Similarly, the repeated recitation of short, powerful promises, like, "The Lord is close to the brokenhearted and saves those who are crushed in spirit," Psalm 34 verse 18, or, "I am with you always, to the very end of the age," Matthew 28 verse 20, becomes a vital lifeline, anchoring the mind in divine truth when emotional currents threaten to pull you under. These are not mere affirmations, they are intentional acts of faith, deliberately planting seeds of hope in the parched soil of despair. Building on this, recognize that faith is not an individualistic pursuit, especially when wrestling with the debilitating effects of trauma. The communal aspect of faith becomes even more critical. Sharing the depth of your pain, the struggle with feelings of abandonment, and the wrestling with faith's perceived insufficiency with trusted brothers and sisters in Christ is not a sign of weakness. Instead, it is a courageous act of vulnerability that allows the healing power of shared experience and supportive prayer to flow. This interdependence is a tangible manifestation of God's presence, working through the body of Christ to offer solace and strength. By allowing others to bear witness to your struggle, you actively dismantle the isolating grip of trauma and invite the collective embrace of divine love to reach you. Reflecting on this journey, a profound convergence begins to illuminate the landscape of our inner experience. The initial resonance of profound challenge, that feeling of an overwhelming burden eclipsing even the most fervent of prayers, now begins to soften, not by erasure, but by a subtle recalibration of perception. We have journeyed through the stark realization that the intensity of our struggle is not a gauge of divine displeasure, but rather an indicator of the deep, pervasive impact of past events on the present self. This understanding is not about minimizing the lived reality of pain, but about shifting the vantage point from which that reality is observed. It's akin to stepping back from a tightly focused lens to reveal a wider panorama, where the immediate intensity of a single storm cloud is contextualized within the vast expanse of the sky. The whispers that sought to convince us of our isolation, of a faith too fragile to withstand the onslaught, have been met not with denial, but with a gentle counternarrative. This counternarrative speaks of a divine presence that seeks not perfection, but persistence. It points to the inherent strength found not in the absence of vulnerability, but in the courage to remain connected, however tenuously, even when the ground feels unstable. The essence of this unfolding understanding lies in recognizing that the divine response is not contingent upon our emotional fortitude, but rather on our willingness to turn towards, even in our brokenness. It is in this act of turning, this persistent, often tremulous, seeking, that the true measure of spiritual resilience is found. As we pivot towards the final reflection, a growing clarity emerges regarding the practical application of these insights. The realization dawns that the very disciplines we might have perceived as burdensome or ineffective can, in fact, become profound anchors in the midst of internal tempests. The seemingly simple act of vocalizing a need, of reaching out in a whispered plea, or of grounding oneself in the ancient promises that have sustained countless souls before us, transforms from a mere ritual into a potent act of spiritual re-engagement. These practices are not about forcing a feeling of strength, but about actively cultivating a space where divine grace can meet us, offering solace and support precisely where it is most desperately needed. They are the quiet, consistent efforts to tend to the garden of the soul, even when the soil feels depleted. This convergence of understanding leads us to a pivotal point, where the accumulated wisdom begins to synthesize into a powerful, unifying perspective. The recognition that our current state of suffering is not a definitive. The path forward is not one of eradicating the past, but of integrating its lessons, transforming its shadows into stepping stones toward a more luminous present. The cumulative effect of these explorations is a dawning awareness that the narrative of being overwhelmed can, and indeed does, give way to a narrative of profound, grace-infused endurance. In the quiet aftermath of wrestling with shadows, when the echoes of trauma still reverberate, a profound truth emerges, not as a sudden revelation, but as a slow, steady sunrise over a weary landscape. It is the understanding that the very weight that threatened to crush us, the feeling that our faith was a vessel too small to contain the immensity of our pain, has, in fact, been the crucible in which a deeper, more resilient connection to the divine has been forged. This journey has not been about finding a miraculous cure for suffering, but about discovering the immeasurable strength that lies not in the absence of scars, but in the grace that flows through them. The whispers of abandonment, so potent in their ability to isolate, have been answered by a quiet, unwavering presence that has walked with us, not around our pain, but directly through its heart. We have seen that the divine does not demand a faith immune to doubt or fear, but rather a faith that, even in its trembling state, still reaches out, still seeks the light. This seeking, this persistent turning towards, is the essence of spiritual vitality. It is in these moments of profound vulnerability, when our prayers are but guttural cries and our faith feels like a threadbare cloak, that the true nature of divine love is revealed. It is a love that cradles the bruised reed, not to break it further, but to offer a gentle support, a steadying hand that whispers, "You are not alone." This understanding shifts the paradigm, allowing us to perceive our struggles not as indicators of spiritual failing, but as profound opportunities for deeper communion. The true practice, therefore, begins not in the absence of difficulty, but in the courageous embrace of our present reality. It is in the conscious choice to return to the breath, to anchor ourselves in the simple, powerful act of being present, even when the past threatens to pull us under. It is in the intentional repetition of divine promises, not as incantations, but as affirmations of a steadfast truth that transcends our fleeting emotional states. It is in the communal act of sharing our burdens, allowing the light of shared experience to illuminate our path, reminding us that the strength we seek is often found in the very act of reaching out. This is not about achieving a state of perpetual peace, but about cultivating a dynamic, resilient faith that finds its deepest expression in the very heart of our human experience, with all its fragility and its unwavering capacity for hope. The journey continues, not towards an elusive perfection, but towards an ever-deepening awareness of the divine presence that sustains us, even when trauma feels heavier than faith.